Hi. Today, I'd like to discuss a landscape that I painted on site probably 20 years or so ago. And it was painted on a day very much like this one, with a lot of clouds, the height of summer, and just a hint of sun coming through a little bit, but not enough to disturb the kind of tonal serenity. And it's not that's not a vocabulary. It's not an ideal that I often strive for in my landscape painting, tonal serenity. I really tend to favor strong sunlight and the way that blocks in forms, strong light and shadow definition. But there are times when this type of day appeals to me very much, even if it challenges me for its subtlety. And even within that subtlety, I've been able to carve out forms, even with this weak light. And some of that carving of forms is a type that I like very much in landscape painting. The shapes of these trees, some of them just emerging from the shadows a little more than others, but not as dramatically as they would in full sunlight. So this calls for some of that tonal subtlety that I'm speaking of, where the values of the lighter trees don't pop that much. And at the same time, when I'm painting the shadows, I'm also thinking that they're as chromatic as the lights. And sometimes painters forget that. We save our intense color for the lights, and we think shadows are just kind of dead space. And of course, that's almost always a mistake, because there's interesting color going on in the shadows too. Perhaps they just aren't as, not as eye-catching, if you will, as the more obvious light planes. The bigger thought is just the composition of the whole thing. And this is, broadly stated, an idea that appeals to me and that I return to over and over again through the years when I paint landscape. And that is the idea of reflection, of still water. And I love that kind of repetition in a painting, and playing with the object and the object's reflection, sometimes sharper, sometimes less defined, blurrier, if you will. And then in a larger sense still, the design of lights and darks within the frame. And that is endlessly interesting to me, in the same way that setting up a model is interesting against drapery or against negative space. And so too here, the setting up of darker shapes against lighter space, lighter shapes, I should say. And that is always of immense interest to me. The palette is pretty limited. It's probably not very different from what I use now, which is to say a titanium white, probably there's some yellow ochre here. I'm guessing there might have been a little bit of cadmium yellow light, but that's a color that I find more appropriate for sunnier days. There's a bright landscape green I like very much. I think it's I'm hesitating, permanent green light, that's what it is. So there's definitely permanent green light, ultramarine blue, and perhaps a little bit of cadmium red, although it doesn't seem to show up very much. So